Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to this Tuesday, July 10th, 2018 special meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. The board is an elected unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We're always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or of other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit time allotted to public participation, and law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We hope that our meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community, so thank you for attending. And I'd just like to stop for a moment and thank our AV crew, especially Kurt, who came out today to film this. We don't... Yeah. So thank you for that. We're not required by law to film every meeting, but we think in the interest of transparency it's good practice. And so we thank Kurt for sort of going above and beyond tonight for that. So the purpose of this meeting tonight is really to, well, I guess Ms. Kennedy, we call the roll and then we'll talk.
Patrick Sullivan.
Here.
Betsy Baglio.
Here.
Beth Barron. Absent. Debbie Braunfeld.
Here.
Jessica Deutsch.
Here.
Bill Hare.
Here.
Daphne Kendall.
Here.
Evelyn Spahn.
Here.
Greg Stankiewicz.
Here.
Michelle Tuck Ponder. Absent. Thank you.
So the purpose of this meeting tonight is really to have a discussion among the board on different aspects of the referendum, and in particular how to frame the question around what goes on the ballot this fall. And as you may know, our ability to meet in private session is very limited to certain matters involving confidential matters and other things. So anytime the board gets together and has a meeting, it has to be noticed, it has to be in public, and that's really the purpose of this, is that we wanted to get together and have a conversation. We're glad that you're all here, but as you can see, it's a very short agenda. Now, there will be a time at the end for public comment, but there's only one item on the agenda, which is this discussion that we hope to have. We did put some clipboards outside for sign up in the way, if you've been here recently, this is the way it works. If you'd like to come and speak, I think, Ms. Kennedy, there's still one outside? There's still a clipboard outside. So if you'd like to say something at the end of the meeting, you're welcome to sign up, and then we'll just allocate time. You know, we say on the agenda 15 minutes. These days, you know, we've had 30 people come and speak, and so it ends up being 2-minute limit, and it's still an hour. So, but anyone's welcome to speak if you wish to. So just please sign up outside so we can allocate time appropriately. And with that, I'll turn it over to our superintendent, Mr. Cochran, if you have any other comments. Or
Yep. I want to just join Pat in thanking everyone for being here tonight on a beautiful summer's evening. It's nice to see the chairs filled in this building, and I know people are watching at home, and we appreciate everyone's involvement in this process. Tonight, as Pat mentioned, is a special working session of the board. It's discussion only. No decisions will be made tonight, but we hopefully will be voting next Tuesday. And we're here to discuss how best to move forward with the facilities referendum on behalf of the children who are currently in our community and on behalf of all those children who will be learning in our schools in the years and decades to come. So the discussion we have tonight is an incredibly important one. The needs of our referendum are clear. We have to expand capacity K through 12. We have to address security in all of our buildings. We have to improve HVAC and electrical efficiencies district-wide, and we have to make improvements to a limited and overused athletics infrastructure. The design of the referendum, I think, is very sound. It's one that aligns our expanded space in our schools with our goals for learning and our goals for wellness. It's one that addresses safety and security. It's a design that addresses HVAC and electrical needs, and it's one that provides safe and adequate places for our student athletes to play and to practice. The question we really have before us is one of tax impact and whether our community is ready to address all of the facility needs at one time. Our facilities committee met yesterday with our architect, Scott Downey, who's here tonight, and we reviewed what we saw as 3 options for the election this fall. And those options included, first, moving forward with the full referendum as a single question on the ballot of $129.6 million. Two, proposing a smaller, more focused referendum of around $80 million, and then coming back to the community some years later to address the rest of the needs that have been identified. And three, to break the full referendum into two questions to be voted on in the fall. So the Facilities Committee is recommending to the board that we proceed with the third option, that the full referendum be broken into two questions. It believes this approach affirms our commitment to the needs we've identified for our students, and it also demonstrates responsiveness to the concerns we have heard regarding tax impact. It provides our community with choices. Scott Downey from Spiesel Architectural Group is here tonight to walk us through the recommendation of the Facilities Committee and the distribution of the referendum projects into two questions. So I'll just turn it over to Scott, and then we can commence with the board discussion after your presentation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We're getting there. So I'm going to walk everybody through the recommendation the superintendent just laid out in terms of, there have been a series of presentations on the scope and the improvements considered in the referendum so that everybody can understand how that would impact what's been discussed in the past and the information you've seen, and how that might be split into two questions. So the first thing to keep in mind is that the scope of the range of improvements that we're talking about remains the same on the whole. The question is really one of how they are packaged and presented to the community. So that consists of improvements at the elementary schools, consisting of renovation improvements, security, and other enhancements at the middle school as well. It includes a new grade 5 to 6 school to help us address capacity. By pulling the 6th grade out of the middle school, which is the most acute capacity concern in the district, that allows us to relieve that, as well as the future capacity concerns at the elementary school with 5th grade. And then at the high school, consideration of improvements, and primarily the change in terms of the packaging that you will see here breaks down around the packaging of the improvements at the high school, splitting those into two questions. So I'll walk you through that. There are also athletic field improvements. And the 5-6 school being planned for this site here at Valley Road. As we've discussed before, the administrative functions here, which include main administration, maintenance, transportation operations, need to be relocated to allow that to happen. So the district has secured an agreement on a property that would allow those operations to move to that property. We're currently in the middle of vetting that out because in terms of reviewing the buildings that are on that site and so forth, and what will be involved in moving the administration into that property. But we do have a budget established which has been presented previously related to that as well. Now again, that is a change. Going back a little ways, some of the previous presentations included a property up on Herrontown Road, which would have been for maintenance and transportation, and an addition at John Witherspoon Middle School for the administration. So those two projects were taken out when the particular property the district is pursuing now became available. It was a property the district had looked at before, so the opportunity to do that offered a number of advantages, and that's why the district has altered that approach.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah. I could tell a joke, but my teenage daughter says that they're really not.
The computer is not cooperating. My apologies. There we go.
All right. See, there you go. Saved from the joke. So in general, as I mentioned, the scope remains the same across the various questions. We're going to talk about how things will be split into potentially two questions. The impact, those two questions, because it does divide the high school into two projects, would require us to resubmit the high school projects to the Department of Education. We've discussed that with them. There is a time impact that we can talk about related to that, that may put the possibility of an October referendum in jeopardy. It may be necessary to consider a November referendum because of the Department of Ed's review timeframe. So we can talk further about that. And the breakdown of the budgets I'm going to show you, the overall total between the two questions remains the same. The question just is how that would be broken down. So again, to review the scope, at the elementary schools, there is no change. Everything you see on the screen in green was in the main question before, would remain in the first question that would be posed on the ballot. That includes HVAC, air conditioning upgrades at various spaces, security, a variety of security-related upgrades, accessibility, and some configurations in the buildings to add doors so the buildings can be broken down to control passage through those buildings and so forth. Library upgrades at Little Brook. Again, nothing new here. This is all what we've talked about in the prior presentations. Electrical upgrades at the middle school. This is all renovation. There is an outside piece, the connection of a covered walkway between the C and E wings. Currently, that requires students to take a fairly long route if they can't walk outdoors in the winter or rainy days. Also, acoustical upgrades in some of the areas of the building. The area that was freed up when the Media Commons was created a number of years ago will be put to improved use. And there are proposed additional parking spaces along Franklin Avenue because parking in general between the high school and the middle school in that part of town is fairly stressed at many times. Field improvements include infield mix improvements, backstops, dugouts to improve the fields, bringing water out to the fields so kids when they are playing can have access to water which they don't have now, and the addition of a scoreboard at the middle school. So at the high school, as I mentioned, the breakdown between what would be in question 1 and question 2 on the referendum really is centered around the scope at the high school. So the items you see in green describe the scope that would remain in question 1 or be in question 1, if you will, and question 2 would consist of the balance of the scope at the high school. Question 1 for the high school is proposed to be a smaller component of the overall project, and it centers around a number of things. First of all, it includes air conditioning to the gym, upgrades to the boilers, upgrades to the elevator, electrical improvements, and fire alarm improvements at the school. So those life safety and operational safety considerations, the secure vestibule, entry enhancements, and so forth. It does include the current fitness center at the school was proposed to have a second floor added. That's a high base space that we were going to divide with a partial second floor. That new space would support wrestling, fencing, aerobics, a variety of activities. And we would be creating additional space there without expanding the footprint of the building. So that would be included in this first question. Also, there is a second floor addition that was going to add 4 classrooms and a teacher collaboration space. So that would provide some additional capacity space at the high school, and that would be included in this first question. So where you see the single flexible learning zone, the improvements to the high school included a range of flexible learning zones, areas of classrooms grouped with teacher collaboration spaces, the infill, the courtyards, and so forth. The remainder of that work would be in question 2, as these packages would break down. Also, there is an additional remote dining area. There were a series of remote dining areas that were being created as part of the high school project because right now the cafeteria does not adequately support the full population. Kids eat around the building in various areas. So distributed dining was a way to bring better food choices and opportunities to them through different areas of the school and make that more available. Improvements to the fields, including the creation of a concession and bathroom area near the stadium, water at the fields, tennis court drainage improvements, the improvements to the lacrosse and the field hockey space, including netting and safety. Now, there was also proposed that field would receive turf. Okay, that turf has been put in question 2. Question 1 would include the safety netting improvements that would be around that field. Also, the new 5-6 school would be in the first question, and the relocation of the administrative, maintenance, operations, transportation would be in the first question. So With regard to the high school, to kind of orient you, what you see on the screen focuses on the areas that would be in question 1. So this is the fitness center you see to the left, the second-story addition, which is right next door to that, and obviously improvements at the entry area to add the classrooms, to add the additional activity, wrestling, fencing, aerobic, and those types of spaces. Diagrammatically, this is what that area looks like. There's a small commons that would be created from the second-story addition. The various spaces, 2 different levels. There would be changing areas in that location and several classrooms and the teacher space. So this area is tough to describe. If you're facing the entrance of the school, it's to the kind of the far left corner of the school, right near what we think of as the lacrosse or the field hockey field. And the stairway in this diagram, I don't know if I have a laser pointer here, but the stairway to the right would go down to a hallway that would lead you to past the nurses area and out to the main entrance. Okay. So the 5-6 school, for those of you who may or may not be aware, we, as part of our process with the Department of Education, we are required to submit our projects to the planning board along with the district's long-range facilities plan. The planning board invited us to a meeting about 2 weeks ago to do a presentation to them. So we showed them some images. I'm just going to walk you through some of those here since we haven't shown those before in our presentations here at the district, but we did show them to the planning board. So this is an image of an existing building that was designed by Fielding Nair, the architectural firm that we are also working with on these projects. This shows an image of the gathering stair and kind of the multi-use space that would be part of the heart of the 5-6 school, you know, the main commons center area as you enter. So just an illustration of an existing building and how that works. It's been operating for a number of years. Now in terms of what the proposed 5-6 school would look like, there are a couple of images here. This would be an image of the main entrance, which is kind of center screen. You see the drop-off drive in front. The materials here would be a series of natural materials, brick and stone, and materials selected to fit into this area. You have the municipal building, the fire building, the various structures that are in this location and around the area as well. This would be the elevation proposed as you face Witherspoon, so across the road from the municipal building right now. So the trees that you see are representative of the ones that do exist there, and those are intended to remain. And then the elevation of the school, the facade would be opened up with glass to allow plenty of natural light. The design of the building does focus on a variety of a fairly long list of sustainability features. Natural light has been demonstrated in a number of studies along with proper ventilation and air exchange to actually improve how students perform on tests in schools. So that environment is very important to us, and part of that is an abundance of natural light into the interior spaces. This is the corner that would face Witherspoon to the left. The existing fire station is to the right. So this would be the corner of the school there. This would be as you go around the back past the fire station. This would be the area that would be largely the bus drop-off and student entrance, staff parking on this backside. So as you know, there's an older portion of this building that has you know, a history here in town, and as we've talked about, our intention is to weave through the design of the new 5-6 a learning experience associated with that history that the kids at the school, as they move through, can partake in and learn from, and be integrated into the studies. Part of that process includes hanging onto the main arch that's in that building. Now, we've looked at that being integrated in a number of different ways. The illustration here shows it on the student drop-off side. So as kids arrive and depart at the end of the day, you know, there's an interaction with that. And, you know, we thought that one might be a nice opportunity to tie that history lesson a little bit deeper to their day-to-day interactions with the building. This is a view looking down on above. So Witherspoon heading off to the right, Valley Road heading off to the left. So that green area in front is not dissimilar to the green area that sits out in front of the school here now. We would create a plaza with some walks and some seating areas, so that can kind of become the community space associated with the school. And that would be the public entrance. Now on the roof you see some green areas, so we are going to be integrating some green roof areas. We are going to be integrating some solar, and energy efficiency is a high priority for the design of this building. This is the main entrance to the bottom of this image. You see the gymnasium to the left, the higher space, and then Witherspoon is at the top of the screen in this image as you see it. So just a couple of images of the current design of the building. Again, everybody keep in mind that the way this process works is we only really take it to a basic level prior to referendum. The full engineering and design happens after referendum. So the programming and planning and the interaction with various groups that has happened to date will again happen and ensue assuming the referendum passes and the project moves forward. So there's a lot of design to develop. These are initial concepts and initial images to give everybody some understanding of where the thought process is at this point. So in terms of the budget and how these two questions would break down, again, the overall budget that you see at the bottom, that $129 million, is the overall budget that we have been discussing at our various presentations. Question 1, that would involve the work at the elementary schools, at JW Middle School, the partial work at the high school, about $8.9 million worth, the 5-6 school, the athletics and the field upgrades, which does include artificial turf here at Valley Road. The artificial turf here is needed in part for two reasons. One, we actually are taking up some space on Valley Road that will be a drop-off and parking area, so that does infringe on the current fields. The turf allows us to fit more fields into a reduced area because the baseball field and the soccer field can overlap a little bit differently. Also, it allows us to use that space to retain water and create a way to manage the water in this area, which has been a concern that we know exists and that we want to try and improve generally the water management on the site with the design, and the turf allows us an opportunity to do that. The administrative improvements, the movement to the new facility, including the purchase of that property, about $12.6 million. So overall, about $80.8 million would potentially be in question 1. Question 2, the $48.8 million that you see there, would be the balance of the work that I didn't show you plans tonight, but that you've seen presented various times in association with the high school, which is fairly comprehensive renovations. 236,000 square feet of the high school would be renovated. Classrooms and additional capacity space created, additional educational spaces of various types, small group, large group, classroom, labs, and various other spaces would be created as part of that. So I'm going to give you two rundowns on the estimated tax impact of these two questions. So question 1 being now $80.8 million. As we've discussed and as you've seen, the district has existing debt, which is rolling off over the next couple of years. So there is a tax impact the first 3 years of this question. So you see the numbers there on the right. It ranges, that this is based on an average home valued at $837,000. So the first 3 years do show a tax impact. However, year 4 would be a reduction from what is currently being paid on taxes. And that reduction will continue to increase over the course of the 30 years of the bonds, so that the 30-year average will actually be a reduction of, I'm not doing that, so somebody has a pointer. Yeah, okay. Would actually be a reduction, an average reduction over the 30 years of $169, $168.85, less than taxpayers are paying currently. So question 1 actually represents, over the average of that 30 years, a tax reduction for the $80.8 million scope. The first 3 years being an increase, years 4 through 30 being a decrease that increases as those 30 years roll out. Now, if both questions were considered, question 1 and question 2, there would be a tax increase. So question 2, you see the numbers there on the right, and again, the first 3 years are the highest. Year 4 drops down. Years beyond that, running up to year 30, do continue to drop down. There is an inflection point from we didn't show it tonight, but a graph we've shown previously, which about 17, 18 years out does show a reduction. But the average over the 30 years is an increase when you consider the $129 budget, and that's the average increase you see, the $71, with the first 4 years laid out there on the screen. So there you go. I tried to be brief. I'm sure there are lots of questions and much discussion. So with that, I'll return it to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Just one comment. I noticed it's getting kind of full in here, and is it possible to get more chairs in the room if we need more chairs? Could we ask Daniel to do that? So we'll see if we can get at least a few chairs for you, for the folks in the back. But now, turning to the board, I guess, as Steve set up in the first place, as we've thought about this, we've thought about at least three different options. One being one question with the full 129 million, one with two questions, and then a third option of just the first question as being the only one. Now, just before we go on, that might be one thing we want to talk about if we're all comfortable with, the option that the Facilities Committee is proposing. But maybe before we even get there, does anyone have any questions for Scott and his presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a bunch of parking questions. And Stephanie, I don't know if this is all you or who. How many spots do we currently have at Westminster that we rent? Parking, sorry.
We don't rent any spaces from Westminster.
Oh, I thought we did.
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. All right. So who is the Franklin?
That's across from Avalon Bay. That Franklin Avenue lot, the town owns it.
No. On Franklin Street, we were going to put Avenue. And who were those for? JW or PHS?
They would be for anybody in the area.
Okay. So I'm wondering if maybe we could move the students to park further away, and we could have the faculty park where they do. I hate to take away green space for parking, and so I don't know. And then we wouldn't have to build those parking spots. The students can park away. They can walk. They're okay. And I don't know if we have to then go through the town to ask where else kids can park.
Well, I think that is a problem for us that currently exists. I know Mr. Snyder's here. I don't know if he wants to go down the rabbit hole of parking in Princeton, but we do struggle to find spaces for our students currently who are driving. I think there are about 40 spots, Scott, that I believe we had designated as angled-in parking along Franklin Avenue. My sense would be that would probably be for faculty.
Well,
But-
there's no way I'd approve us building spots for students. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Part of the reason that we proposed those spots is because when we listened to the neighbors of the high school and the middle school, one of their concerns was parking,
Okay.
and that people on the weekends during sporting events, swim meets, people are parking on their driveways. So one of the concerns that would address is people blocking the neighbors' driveways.
So this is something our community has asked us for. I mean, these are the type of things that we need the community to understand, that we, are trying to make.
We're out of parking for our
Right.
staff at the high school currently.
Right.
So they're scrambling to find spaces in town
No,
as
I
well.
totally understand that. And I was saying, move the students, but then again, we're having the community say, hey, we don't want all the students parking because they're parking on our grass and they're parking on our yards. So we're like, okay, so now we'll do that. And maybe whoever buys Westminster, we can maybe rent space from them sometime. Because the other thing is, I know over at the JW lot, I always see open spaces during the day. And so I want to make sure that we're also, that we should have faculty being parking there.
Right.
And that, for some reason, that one's always open, and I don't know why.
Because the kids don't drive.
No, that should be for the staff. No, but we should be able to have PHS staff park at JW, and that's not a long walk. I mean,
Sure.
I kind of want to push back a little on the parking. I just hate to see us take away green space for parking. What was one question? I can let
Just
somebody else go.
As the high school expands, however, we're going to be having more staff, and there will be a greater need for parking. So we have to take that into consideration, and better to do so now. So we can have that conversation.
Okay. You want me to keep going?
Sure. you may as
All right.
well, Yeah.
Okay. So the generators. I know we're not getting generators, but we're getting hookups for generators. And I'm curious, how many days in the past 10 years have we even needed generators? I know JP had a day. And I know they came to the high school and middle school, and I heard they had a fabulous time. And I know there was a lot of just logistics. But I'm just curious, how many times have we needed these generators? And I don't know if anyone knows that.
Since I've been superintendent,
yeah, that's
in
fine.
the last 4 years, few days at JP, more than once in the past few years. At Littlebrook, we needed it. Riverside.
But if we upgrade a lot of this other stuff, will we still, is that something we would still need? Like,
Scott, that's a question for you. I mean, I don't know if the electrical upgrades would reduce the need or.
First of all, to be clear, so everybody understands, and no, we are not putting in generators.
Right.
Correct.
All we are doing is we are including some electrical reconfiguration to create a hookup so that generators could be either added in the future or a rented generator could be brought in at a time when needed. So it's a fairly low-cost way. If you recall, early on in the referendum discussions, generators were part of the scope. So this was a fairly low-cost way to reduce the cost and at the same time provide some flexibility to the district. So if you had a power outage for a couple of days, you would have the opportunity potentially to bring in a generator and power certain aspects of the building, or in the case of an emergency, to have the ability to facilitate that. The electrical upgrades are really independent of the generator need, any of the other electrical upgrades being undertaken. So in some cases, we're adding air conditioning. We need an additional electrical capacity and electrical work to support that. So there are other electrical improvements that are part of the referendum, but not related to generators.
It may have been before you were superintendent. It was certainly before I was on the board. Superstorm Sandy. Many people here probably remember. Many schools had no power for almost, I think we were at a week. So that's a time in fairly recent history that.
But that's hopefully a once in a.
Well,
once in
it
a
seems to
generation.
be people keep saying
Yeah.
that, and yet the climate keeps shifting in some ways, and the
But
more.
I feel like that's a real nice thing to have, but not
But
like
I
a
guess
necessary.
the thing that convinced me was so it looks like it's 50,000 per school to do that, and suppose it happens. Sandy was in December, if I remember right. So
November.
So it's cold. I mean, if you have things that freeze, the repairs then to fix, piping and everything that's frozen, how much more would that cost than the 50,000? So that's what convinced me that it did make sense for that 50. Plus, your food storage, if it goes bad, if it doesn't get power, so all the food you have stored in the school, all those losses. So it was more of a way to prevent losses than anything.
And you have the potential if one school loses power, then one could conceivably have to call school for the entire district. So you get lost learning for all kids.
But we've done the opposite with that. I know schools have been closed and other kids have gone if you had to. Yeah. I mean, you're allowed, there's emergencies and there's emergencies.
But I think Bill's point is well taken from a facility standpoint. If this does happen in the winter, you could cause $50,000 to $150,000 worth of damage with frozen pipes. So you do want to have the access to generators so that you don't freeze your building, because frozen pipes could cause you thousands of dollars worth of damage if you should lose power in January, February. You would be powerless to fix that. So I think it would be penny wise and dollar foolish not to have the generators. I think it's when you're doing a renovation like this, I would say most, if not all, industry standard now would be to have generators. Also, schools typically become disaster beacons and need to have the generators if they need shelter space and things like that for disasters. So I just think from the standpoint of the safety of the building and the money that we're investing in the building, it's a secure way of making sure of a return on our investment.
And Evelyn, just to piggyback on that, we know from some of the Rutgers studies that New Jersey is facing, the threat of increased storms like Sandy in the future. So if we're planning for 30 years out, I think you're exactly right. It makes sense for us to plan not just for the schools, but for the community. And it makes sense for a small amount of money to help prepare us for eventualities.
Look, I never think money's small, but I do think we have to protect our investment, and that's a protection.
All right, Scott, can I ask you more on Thanet? I know we're paying about $6 million to purchase it, and I was curious what we have to do to it to walk in the door. There's 3 floors, right? What's already done? Kind of what the cost, because then I saw it was at 12, and I'm curious.
So
6 to
the
12.
budget, yeah, so the budget is at 12.6. There are improvements that would fall into 2 categories. First of all, there are some improvements to the buildings, some upgrades to various systems in the buildings that need to be considered, just because we're also going to have to do renovations to create the office structure and so forth that you guys would need to facilitate your uses. So those renovations will require certain components of the building to be brought up to code, current code.
So wait, let me back up. When was the last time it was used as a building? Because it's not students, it's adults, so it's different codes.
The building has an active use currently on the 3rd floor, has a tenant.
Right, so I'm just curious how much has to be done like right away.
Well, so the way the building code works is the improvements that we will need to do to renovate, create office space and so forth to facilitate your use will trigger certain upgrades. It's not that the building is not code compliant, it's just those upgrades get triggered when certain levels of improvements are done, and that would need to be considered here. So we are in the process of vetting that scope in detail. Our engineers have been through the building. We're still working on the site analysis and mapping out there are some wetlands on the site that we know where they are. We just need to map them out and so forth. That's underway right now, so I'll be able to develop an itemized scope fairly soon.
All right, because Bill just told me also the HVAC is good for another 7 to 10 years, so we don't have to upgrade that or fix
Well,
that?
there are improvements to the HVAC that will need to be considered, not the least of which will be some reconfiguration because your layout will need to be accommodated and so forth. So as with any renovation, there are some improvements that are associated with that.
Oh, then it's, I'm sorry, it's replaced the RTUs?
Rooftop units, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is 1.375 million. I don't think that was in your number that you showed today.
No,
Right.
we actually reduced that from
Yes.
what it
Okay.
was originally budgeted at.
So
yeah.
that was yesterday's meeting, was 1.375 million out.
Can I ask the bigger question about, sorry, you probably have more questions, Debbie, but before we get too far into the weeds, the big, the big question is, and this is for you, Daphne, or maybe Scott or Steve, I was in the meeting yesterday, so I understand some of the logic between the split of 80 for the first question and 50 for the second question, and even the logic of the 2 questions. Like, can we just clarify that, and maybe we want to discuss that a little bit about why the stuff that's on the board on green was in the first question and the stuff in yellow on the second question, and what was the broad logic around splitting it that way, and even the logic of splitting it, just so everyone's clear on that.
Thank you. And also how 2 questions work on a ballot. I think that would be
Yeah.
important to discuss as well.
Well, I can say, as I indicated at the outset, I believe we do need it all for our kids. But we also are listening to a community that is concerned about $129 million and the tax impact associated with that. And so there is a desire to look at the question in such a way that gives choices to our community. If we go with a single question of $129.6 million and it was voted down, we are left with a very pressing need, particularly at the middle school in 2020, which is going to be over 850. It's at 724 right now, and going up from there to 1,000, over 1,000. So there is a critical need to build the 5-6 school and to free up space at the middle school and our elementary schools. The high school expansion is also needed. We're 200 over capacity right now. The demographics are such that the numbers will remain fairly flat for the next 4 years and then start going up rather steeply. So if the second question were not to pass, we still have that need, but we could regroup, redefine, and come back to the community with some of the items in the second question. Security for all of our buildings to ensure that we have those safe, secure but welcoming vestibules. That's important. The HVAC is a really critical need for our kids. You know, some of the athletic improvements, we looked very carefully at those and tried to get the ones that were really most critical. We don't have adequate and often safe spaces for our kids to play. So we did need to expand make some improvements there. So I see those as the most pressing needs. I think all of the needs are warranted for our kids. The most pressing, most critical would be in that first question. But I think the second question, and I welcome comments from the public and the rest of the board on this, but I think that those needs are there too and need to be addressed at some point.
And so if we could back up, so we started discussing this referendum last year, before anyone could think that the New Jersey state and local taxes deduction would be reduced and capped. So, yeah. It would be great to do everything at once, but like Steve said, I personally don't think we can take a risk on the $130 million altogether, because if it doesn't pass, we have nothing and we have big problems. And I think the way that the bonds are laid out, the fourth year becomes much more manageable for the community. So in the event the second question didn't pass, we could reintroduce that and taxes wouldn't increase. So basically, we want to give the community a choice. This is what we think we need, but we are also very respectful of, you know, people's dollars, and so we want to give the community a chance to be heard.
So just to be clear, if in the event we do two questions and the first question passes and the second one doesn't, then we would have to have a referendum 2-3 years down the road to deal with that second question all over again.
Those same needs, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And just to clarify, it's my understanding, right, that the first question must pass in order for the second question
That
to
is
pass.
correct.
Okay.
Right. So, yes, question 1 has to pass in order for question 2 to have a chance. Yes.
But one of the best things I think about question 1 is we add those 4 classrooms. It's about a capacity of 100 to the high school. Looking at the demographer's report, I don't know which one it is, but it shows 2024 is when we hit 1,700. So we are doing something really good for the high school while we see what happens with all the affordable housing and all the new buildings. So we are helping out at the high school, even though we will be over
Well, I think
capacity.
that's an important point to make, Bill, because if we, and it's back to your point about trying to not be penny wise and dollar foolish, if we do see an increase in the numbers at the high school, and we would have to buy trailers or rent trailers at $500,000 a piece, we would be looking at 4 or 5 trailers for the equivalent space. You're looking at $2 million, $2.5 million, and then you're renting them every year on top of that for $45,000 or $50,000 a piece, and it's only temporary. So if yes, if we can spend a couple of million now and get some needed space that safeguards us against having to put trailers in parking lots that then reduce the parking that we have, or the green space, I think it's the smart thing to do.
I had a question as well, Scott. The numbers that Mary has worked on for us, they've been pretty consistent over the months that we've been talking about this. But when is the final? When do we get that final report of for the average assessed home? What is year 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe the first 10 years look like? We know certainly the overall for 30 years, but I'm just wondering, when we finalize the number, when do we in the public see the final tax impact?
Everything is just an estimate at this time. All the way up until right before the referendum, the financial advisors will review that again, check to see what the market is, see what the rates are, estimate it, because it'll be part of, once the the plan, is decided upon by the board, what the impact will be, and that's part of the referendum explanation. And so we still have time for those finals.
By the time people go to the polls, we'll be able to say with certainty, most certainty.
Yeah, we'll be able to say closer to reality,
Okay.
because then there's still a couple months before the bonds are
Right.
actually
Yeah,
sold.
yes, exactly.
So it's still always an estimate until it's in stone.
Okay, but the final number that is decided upon and voted on by voters, we cannot go above that regardless of what happens to the rates.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that the referendum amount is a cap. You can't spend $1 more. So, that's why we've included contingency and other things in our budgets and so forth. On the tax impact, they are estimating, but the discussions we've had with them, they are estimating hopefully conservatively. They have to anticipate what interest rates will be and so forth, but they're trying to be on the high side so that the reality will be better than that. That's typically what we see happen. But we are in an environment where those things are changing, so they're being careful with the numbers. And up until the point where the bonds are actually issued, it is in fact an estimate.
Okay. And so is it fair to say, if I'm a voter and I'm trying to understand this and what is the difference between these two questions, is it fair to say then that in question 1 is elementary school improvements, security improvements in all buildings, including the high school, the new 5-6 school, some athletics, and HVAC across all the districts?
And middle school improvements.
And middle school admin and infrastructure type improvements, right? And then question 2 is effectively the high school expansion and then some additional athletics. And so that's a simple way to think about how it's bifurcated. And so when the facilities committee went through and got to a number of 80, it was really doing that. It's going through and saying, is this infrastructure related? Is it HVAC related? Is it security related, et cetera? That's all in question 1. And then high school is really separated out in question 2. And so I guess when you think about how you might want to position this on a ballot, as we said, we have 3 choices. 1 question for everything, 2 questions, or simply the first question only and leave the high school expansion for some other board to deal with, right? And so it seems like the third one doesn't have a lot of attraction to it because the second question is an option for voters, and if they want it, they can do it. If they don't want it, they don't do it, right? So it's almost the same as having the first question only. You're just giving people a choice, and everybody likes choice. So it really comes down to what are the pros and cons? Is it really just what you said, Steve, that the concern is that there may be people who are concerned about the rapid tax impact of one question all at once and would prefer to be able to vote for these infrastructure type things, and that's it, knowing that they're going to have to vote again if the referendum fails in 2-3 years for the rest of it? I'm just trying to think of what's the advantage or disadvantage in terms of structuring the question this way from a voter's point of view. I guess it gives me the choice to say, I understand there's some infrastructure and stuff that needs to be done, and so I'm voting for that. But if I don't vote for question 2, I'm voting to sort of kick the can down the road and deal with it in a couple of years, right? Or not.
Or not, yes.
Or just let it.
But
And get
from
more
our
data.
perspective,
Yeah.
but it's our statement that what we're acknowledging that this scope is what we really believe
Correct.
we need ideally.
And I would also say it's either us saying we can do without this and we're only going to put this piece on, or it is us saying we need all of this and we're giving the voters the option to say, okay, we need to hold off on this. My concern with a smaller, and my concern as well if the second question fails, but my concern with a smaller referendum is there's very little history of having a second question so quickly on the heels of a first. So if the first one were to pass at a smaller amount, what is the likelihood that a community would fund a second one, fairly quickly because the need is there? So in my mind, it's sort of, as Jess was saying, we're making the statement that this is important, but allowing there to be a choice.
Yeah.
Correct.
Instead of us saying.
And I guess, too, the one thing that that I might consider if I'm a voter is that if I decide to vote for question 1 but not question 2 because, well, I want to work on it more, I think the board should work on it more. Frankly, it's taken a lot of time this year to do all this stuff, and you're having another board get involved in that down the road to not deal with other important issues. But you're also thinking about construction costs,
Rising interest rates.
Interest rates
Right.
rising.
That's what I was going to say.
Materials costs going up, tariff costs going up.
Correct.
Those sorts of things.
I think we have a responsibility to the public to tell them the impacts of their decisions. While I agree that I do like the idea of giving them the choice of the two choices, and I completely agree with that. I think we have to be completely transparent in that second question. I think for the taxpayers, they could say, well, we're just not going to vote for that second one because what's the harm in that? I think we have to be very transparent in what the harm is in that, because there is a harm in that, because the numbers are only going to go up. But I do feel that the big crux here is that third year and the painful impact of that third year. So that's what I think the taxpayers are weighing against. I don't think I don't think most people disagree that it needs to be done. I think we're all trying to weigh out when and how to balance so that we can all live with it. To me.
Right.
This town is incredibly supportive of education. The town is incredibly interested in education, which is why we were all spending a summer night sitting in this room instead of outside, where it's lovely. But I think that we really owe it to our taxpayers to let them understand the impact of waiting and what that would mean, because there is a cost impact of not doing. There's
a cost impact, as you're pointing out, as Pat mentioned, in terms of rising interest rates, rising construction cost. And there's also an educational and wellness impact on the students who are in an already overcrowded building without the kinds of facilities they deserve to have, limited in some of our course offerings as a result of that. So yes, there's the impact, the financial impact that would happen through waiting, and then there's the impact on students and staff if we wait to make improvements at the high school.
So Steve, can you also talk?
But I don't want to lose residents because we put too
Right.
much weight on them. So that's the balance.
Yep.
And can you talk about the different voting now? Because the questions are going to maybe push everything to November. Is that true?
Very possibly, Scott. You can certainly chime in on this. My understanding is that by splitting the question, the Department of Education now has to go back and review the split to determine how much of the state share, the grants that we get back for new construction and renovation, how that split will now happen. How much of the state share will happen for question one, how much of the state share, the grant share, would come back for question two, and that's going to take them some time. And don't there are other considerations?
It does. I mean, we actually, for the high school, we'll actually start the process with them over again. We have to split it into two physical applications, and those have to be submitted because they have to issue a separate approval letter that aligns with each question. So, yeah, so that process will happen. That will slow down their review process, which is why I believe October is probably not realistic in that scenario, and we should consider that November is probably the case.
If we had a November election, how would it impact? I know the talk all along has been, the reason we wanted to do October, a couple of reasons. One was that we would get reimbursement of about $500,000 this year from the state, which we wouldn't get in November. And then the second one is we have a tight construction timeline to get the 5-6 school up and running. So if we went to November, how would those impact?
So for the first, I believe you will receive that benefit. Stephanie, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It just may not be in the first year. Maybe it's in the second year, depending on timing. With regard to the construction time frame for the 5-6 school, yes, it is tight, and November poses some challenges. Right now, we're looking at the possibility of starting some of the engineering to facilitate a faster review process. And we're looking at some other things that would allow us to respond to that. So I think we can effectively respond to that. You know, it is a month, but in terms of the bidding window, we need to make sure we can accommodate the approvals for the site and so forth that will be necessary. But we're sorting through that now.
And does it affect our option at Thanet at all? I mean, in terms of that waiting that month?
No, it doesn't.
No, okay.
Good question.
If I can follow up, Scott, and from your perspective, and Stephanie, from yours as well, what have you seen that might have affect the risk profile over the last 4 months. Have costs risen these last 4 months? Have interest rates risen? What's the situation in terms of that as we move forward? And does that increase the risk of, waiting on part of this or not?
So costs have risen. There was a report out this week that I think it was CNN, but I could be wrong. It was a major news outlet that cited steel prices having risen 40%, spot steel prices over the course of just 2018 alone. There was a similar report in Engineering News Record about a month ago. So, prices have risen quickly related to the tariff threats and so forth, I believe. So that, yes, costs are going up. Yes, interest rates. We are in a rising environment for interest rates. So, the numbers that you've been seeing from me throughout the process are not costs. They are budgets. We purposely have tried to budget out to the point where it would be the midpoint of anticipated bidding. So we did allow some extra escalation factors in the numbers that you've been seeing. And at this point, we also have contingency and so forth built into that. But delays, for example, a delay of a couple of years would likely impact those numbers.
I would just like to add that none of us have a crystal ball. And like, for example, September 11th happened. No one could anticipate it. The stock market crashed. Interest rates, went down. So I think the way I'm thinking is we need to do what's right for our community today, what the community can afford today, and hope, for a recession or, something, later on. And I'm not an optimist.
Can I again? I gotta go back to this parking. I really want to be on the record for this. In terms of the 5-6 building, it'd be great if we didn't have to do as much parking for parents, and if we could use and share with the town their lovely municipal parking. And I really want to go on record for that, because I know we are trying very hard to do share services and, maybe even work with the first aid to see if we could add a little more parking to them so that we don't all have to be building parking. And just really want to go on the record that we would love to share more parking with other people in the community. So there you go. Yep.
And we did ask, right, Stephanie? We had conversations with the municipality about using some parking spots at the municipal building.
Yeah, those conversations are ongoing. Part of
Okay.
the problem with the municipal parking is the summer with the pool. That's part of that. But we're trying to determine other ways that we can do some shared services.
Yeah, we are in conversations.
Right, but most of our school is not during the summer.
Correct.
I mean, that's why it makes, when I see that, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We're here September to June, and the pool at that point in June is really only open on the weekends. Yeah. No, I just find, I hate how much parking we are adding. I know we need parking. I got parking. I understand that. Buses, everybody. I just hate getting away with land because it does that whole thing with the temperature and makes our, earth hotter. And so just trying to reduce some of the parking.
I have a quick question. Earlier, we mentioned, I think, Scott, you said that $80 million is the maximum that we could bond out. My question is, so I'm looking here at the Thanet renovation upgrade budget. So can money be moved from one category to another? For example, if we max out on one item and we need to spend more, but we haven't maxed out on another item, like lighting versus piping. If we run out of money on piping, but we have a bunch of excess on lighting, can the lighting money be used for the piping?
So in the aggregate, the $80.8 million is a cap. You can't. You're not authorized by the public to bond for any more than that, and you can't spend more than that. But within individual line items, it's not unusual that you get a higher price in one area and a slightly lower price in another. And yes, the money within the detailed line items in those budgets, yes, can be shifted around in that sense.
Because I guess when I'm looking at Thanet, it's a lot of money. And I'm trying to figure out how do we, I know you've had to put contingencies in there, and I understand that it's a building we've been in a couple times, so there's still a lot of unknowns, but I would really like if that 12.6 million was, at the end of the day, was 8 million that we spent. And I know I'm perhaps being unrealistic, but so how do we control the spending at Thanet so if there's a possibility, it can be? So we sign up, we pass the 80 million, and we spend 75 million. That would make me happy 3 years from now. And the question is, how do we get to that? How do we, 475,000 or 408,000 for the new roof? If it only costs 100,000.
I just think you would be. I think you would be in worse shape if we were on the other end of this, and Scott came to us and said, "We're out of money."
Yeah.
Right. So we have to make sure that we have contingencies in case we need abatement, in case we need. We have wetlands. We have we have things that we have to do. I just want to be. I want to respect the architectural firm and what they do. I'd like to see those numbers go down too, but I also want to make sure, we can go down.
Yeah.
We can't go up. So, I'd like to see the number go down. That would be a happy dance for all of us. But I want to make sure if we run into abatement or something like that, we have that contingency and we're not caught unawares by that. So I want to be prepared for the surprises.
Yeah, I guess it's just, Scott, I mean, how do you,
Well, as I mentioned, we're early in the process, and it's the nature of the referendum process. Every district goes through the same thing. The majority of districts who do referendums do end up, not spending all the money. You end up, coming out better than these budgets would suggest. But
Can you say that one more time?
Yes.
Just made me feel better.
But as I think you well stated, my job is to make sure that you have the money there to implement the project, and that's why the contingencies are built into this. The goal, as the full design process ensues, there will be value engineering. We will be looking very closely at all of that. Our goal is not to spend the full amount, it's to spend as much less as possible, but we need to make sure that we can implement the projects, and that's where the caution comes in.
I'd also like to add is when we bond for whatever we bond for, when the projects are all complete, whatever funding's available goes back to tax relief.
Scott, I just wanted to clarify too. One of the things that's been really useful in the process so far has been that sort of iterative process here that we've had input from the community, and that's been so valuable, and we continue to hear it. And I want to just hear from you again that the design process is such that we have a lot of work yet to be done, and we could still continue to have that input as we go forward. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Not that we will hopefully continue to have it. We will have it. I mean, the process we went through so far, where we met with faculty and students and community groups and community members, that process will continue after the referendum when the full design process ensues. So it will continue to be an iterative process. We will continue to be at the board regularly, showing progress and how things are developing and so forth. And absolutely, that process will continue.
Thank you.
Steve, I guess just a couple questions more, and I'm done. But one is, suppose we split it into two questions. I guess if I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a parent of a seventh or eighth grader, and so what do you say to that parent? I mean, yeah, there you go. Couple parents here. So what do you say to these?
Jump in. What's the question?
Have you put at risk? What have you put at risk? What have we put at risk by doing two questions in terms of the well-being of your kids?
Right. So I think that's a great question, and I think we went through yesterday. The facilities committee went through the list, and I think if the first question passes, I would be able to sleep at night, knowing that we really made some significant improvements at the high school. Not all of them. I would like to see. I mean, as a mom, I would like to see my kids in newer facilities and 21st century learning. But as a board member, I respect the taxpayers, and I'm concerned the 129.9 is a big lift, and so we compromised, And so my son's going to high school, and with or without renovations, and I think it will be a good experience.
And then my last question is, next week, are we going to look at a sample referendum question? I mean, I can't remember from 2012 what a referendum question looks like. That's what I thought, yeah. So if it's 2 giant paragraphs of text, I guess the voting machine's going to say, hey, you can't vote for, B unless you press some button on A, right? But also, am I going to know, walking in that booth, that this is question 1, 80 million? I guess you have to read it, right? But it's fairly detailed. There's no summary.
The County Board of Elections still sends out the sample ballots, and the board question would be part of that sample ballot.
Is there an explanation of what all that means? Like, I've seen referendums from the
well,
state where about environmental whatever, and doesn't there something that's like a synopsis?
Well, part of, yeah, there's an interpretive statement, yeah. And then part of the boards and districts, once the numbers once we're ready to move forward, then we would share all that information with everybody publicly. Like, this is going to be the final, 2 questions, and this question is going to be this, and try to communicate that to the community, that what you have to vote on, what yeah.
Do we as a board prepare that interpretive statement?
No, the bond council does.
Okay.
But we look at it. Do we have to approve it?
You have to approve it.
Okay, so we have a chance
I don't write it, the bond,
When do we actually approve it?
The questions, we have to notify the Board of Elections minimally 60 days. Yeah, what did I say? Minimally, yeah, minimally 60 days
So then,
from the election.
are we able to, in one of the, let's say, whichever month it ends up being, when we meet at the end of the month prior, are we able to post the question and just show the community what the question looks like?
Oh, yeah, it would be an agenda item.
Okay.
Okay,
Very long agenda
right.
item.
And so, are we planning to do that July or August?
We're in July.
Or- Well,
July
next
17th.
week.
No,
July 17th.
Yeah. I thought,
So next week?
don't we
Or
vote first which way we want to do the question? Like, what
That's
is our?
next week, I think.
Right, so next week we vote on what we want the question to look like, right? Or,
Not necessarily, no.
no?
Or how we're
No,
presenting the
we have to
referendum.
vote to submit the separate
Right.
project back to the DOE, or the split project.
Right.
So all the other projects would remain the same, but the high school package would then become 2 packages and would be resubmitted to the DOE.
So if the vote were in October, we would have to do that in July, by the end of July, correct?
Correct.
August 2nd.
Right.
So then if the vote is November, we have until the start of the school year, basically.
Yeah,
Right. Yes.
August, the end of August, yeah.
Okay. All right, good, that's helpful. Any other questions before?
Actually, with all the people here coming up, I'm hoping some of them who are teachers at the high school or work at the high school. Yeah, I'm on question 1. I'm really excited about this 4 classrooms, and I would like it if some of y'all are from the high school would address whether you think it's going to be a good addition and solve a lot of problems or not, because I believe it will, and I'd like to see if that's validated or not.
And I would love to add one thing, Pat, when you just said, sort of, let's think about this child, right? I think it's important to say we are all thinking about the children in all of this that we do. We're thinking about the taxpayers, we are taxpayers. But I just have to say, the facilities committee, this whole board, Steve, Stephanie, I mean, you've really, the iterative process, someone said that, Jess, I think. I just think it's been a long process and it's ongoing, but it's been a very valuable one that keeps coming back to kids. And that's, I think, where it should be.
Betsy, thanks for saying that. I totally agree. So the one thing I wanted to add in terms of for the community, I like the idea because it's up to the community. However we structure it, it's up to the community. We can do our best to think about issues that we'd like you to think about and you to consider before you pull whatever the lever is for whatever questions are going to be. But one thing I think we as a board, well, there are a number of things we as a board have to do. One is to make sure that we're looking after the best interests of our students. We've taken an oath on that. The second thing, though, is to try to anticipate to the best extent possible what are the future issues that might come up and how we can best mitigate that. And so I really appreciated the conversation right now about the generators, and that's a really good example, or the conversation about the trailers, how if we had to put up a lot of trailers at the high school, it would cost us a lot of money from the operating budget that will outweigh a lot of the, potentially, in the voter's mind, some of the savings by not doing it. The other thing that I really liked about the idea about structuring it as 2 questions, and I wanted to throw this out to the board, is we are in a turbulent time, and I appreciated, Scott, what you said about the rising costs, and we don't know. And you're absolutely right, Daphne. We don't know what's going to happen. But by splitting it into 2 questions, we give the voters a little bit more time to anticipate what's going to happen, whether it's October or November. And we give the voters a chance to have as much time as possible to think about this. I love the vision. I love the entire vision. I think it's a tremendous need and a tremendous amount of time and effort's gone into it. And we want you, the voters, and the community to have as much time as possible to consider that. And so that for me is a plus for, if we do decide to go in that direction.
Okay, so there's no action tonight on the board. We were just here to talk, and so unless anyone has other questions, for the folks who might have come after I started the meeting, there's a clipboard out in the hall. If you'd like to speak, we just ask that you sign up. And so, oh, it's in here now. So, oh, there it is. Okay, so if you could pass that forward, I've got one here with some names on it as well, and then we'll divide up the time accordingly.
Can we just go over, I'm sorry, the timeline again? Because
sure,
how do we know if we're doing October or November? So I don't know when I'm, that's what confuses me right now.
I guess the state.
So my recommendation is that if we are splitting the question and breaking the high school into 2 projects, we're looking at November. Just the reality of the Department of Education review process.
Okay.
It's going to be November.
But when do we as a board say yes or no to that? That's where I'm stuck.
So the final referendum questions can't be drafted until we have the Department of Education approvals. So once we have the approvals, the questions get finalized, and at that point would be before you. So as was mentioned, the minimum is 60 days before, which would be end of August, early September.
So when do you think we'd get an approval from the state?
Yeah.
I guess is the next question, right? Because that determines everything.
Right.
Well, anticipating this discussion, we've started putting together the revised packages that would go to them, and we've had conversations with them, so they know this is potentially coming. And we've tried to pave the way to make the process as smooth as possible. We will sit down with them, walk through it, and do everything we can to expedite that, but ultimately it is their time frame once we turn it over to them.
Is there a risk that they won't get it to us by, I guess it would have to be the end of August?
Well, there's time involved, which is why I'm saying I don't believe October is a realistic option under that scenario, and that it's November. But I believe that will give us enough time.
So in essence, you're saying if we vote next week to make it 2 questions, we're moving it to November?
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have to, by the end of July, finalize everything that we were just discussing.
Right. Well, yes.
So then,
you're accepting the move to November.
And I think that the second part of Debbie's question, then, I think that changes the decision points for us a little bit, because I thought that we were going to be voting in July about putting a question to the voters and on a date certain, but next week. But since now we're talking about November, I guess there's a couple things the way I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong. So next week we would decide to split the questions and put that to the county that way. Okay, so that's all we decide to the state next week, and then the month after, or at least by we don't have a meeting the first part of September, I don't think. But we'd have to have a special meeting.
We have August 28th.
August 28th, yeah, so many of us will be away, but, we could do it August 28th to vote for putting the question together. Or we could have a special September
If we had to.
meeting,
Yep.
right? To put the question together. Once the question's together, it's kind of done at that point, right? There's an
Correct.
election
Right.
60 days after that, but
Correct.
then there's not a lot of more back and forth anymore, and it's done.
Correct.
So I guess we can figure out, at some point between now and then, if we're comfortable doing that in August, September, but it sounds like this meeting coming up next week is not, it's important, but it's not a huge decision point. It's a decision point
For
about whether to
this.
split the
Well,
question or
Right.
not, but that's it. Okay.
It's deciding how to put the question on. But again, if we don't make the decision in July about the wording of the
Yeah,
question,
then-
we're
right.
not voting in October.
Yes,
So, right.
right, okay. Is that clear? All right, so it looks like we have about 30 people who want to speak. And so, that's an hour, at 2 minutes each, that's an hour.
And I'm the timekeeper.
And,
Yeah.
a couple of ground rules before we start. Number one, if you can just identify yourself, where you're from. I will tell you who's on deck. Betsy will keep a clock of 2 minutes, and we ask you to respect the time limit. There's no ceding of time to other speakers. I think, in the past, people have done that, but it's really not fair to people who are limited to 2 minutes to suddenly have someone speaking for 10. And so that's about it. The only other thing I would say is in the past, we've always tried to be respectful of one another. We are to each other, and we hope that you will be to each other and to us as well. And that's it. So with that, we can get started. And if we could start with Jennifer Jang, and then on deck would be Peter Madison.
So when you hear the timer, you have 10 seconds to wrap up.
All right, good evening. Thank you. I'm Jennifer Jang, a parent of two soon-to-be PHS students, one rising senior, one rising freshman. I just want to well, first I just want to thank the board. I know you guys have worked tirelessly on this issue for well over a year. Some of your compatriots who have rotated off also worked on it, so I appreciate all your due diligence. No process is perfect, but I want to thank you for your efforts. I just want to put a plug in for the expansion, renovation of the high school. I can see where this discussion may be going toward two questions, and I understand why, and I can support that. But I'm just putting out to the board and to the greater community, I think that PHS very badly needs to be expanded and renovated. If you look into the history of Princeton, this topic has been debated for 5 decades, going back to the 1970s when the high school was then over capacity at 1670 for a school then built for 1,200. So for some people, this may prove that we can keep going forever in this building. Others may say, wow, how is this still, why is this still an issue? And what I would say is this, not that I can speak to why it's an issue. I think that this school, as one teacher described to me, is a little bit like a Potemkin school. It has this wonderful, beautiful Gothic facade, but at the same time is like a patchwork of buildings and classrooms and projects. It's not that it doesn't do a pretty good job, but while an overcrowded library, a locker that jams, a cafeteria that can't serve all its students, a field that cannot be played on, no single one of these factors may ruin a student's day or week or month. Nevertheless, there are many, many pieces that are no longer functioning optimally or do not meet the needs of 1,600 students, let alone 1,800 or 2,000 in a few years. And I feel that while our students are very resilient, and many of us survived high schools that were not optimal, that should not be our goal. Our kids don't need silver spoons. They don't need everything handed to them on a silver plate. But when they have to be in a building 7-8 hours a day with very few choices in those tiny desks, in hot rooms, in small rooms, crammed into the gym, not able to play their sports because the field is soggy, not able to get their lunch because there's only one point of sale. Bathrooms might not be cleaned optimally because our great staff is, custodial staff is spread so thin across this giant campus. I think it asks a lot of our kids. And I think that we can not only maintain, but we want to do better. And I think what will be before this community is not just maintaining, but in a few years, whether we want to go in one direction or another. Thank you.
Can I ask Scott a quick question and follow up? Scott, doesn't this question 1 include a new point of food service over near the PAC building? So there'd be a second place for students to get food?
It does include a new point of service for food, but not near the PAC. It's on the school, where the school store is now. On the main floor. Yeah, on the main floor.
Good points. Thanks for reminding me, Bill. One other thing I wanted to mention to the audience is, I'll ask the board, if you'd like to respond to anything that people. We don't want this to be a Q&A of individual board members or of the board, but board members might have questions or clarifications of things that people say. And so you're welcome, board members, to raise your hand and comment appropriately.
And I raise my hand for my.
No, you're good. That's all good. Yeah.
Just for practice.
Okay, and on deck is Susanna Monceau. So, Mr. Madison.
Yes, Peter Madison. Snowden Lane, a resident for 38 years. I've never had children in the Princeton public school system, but paid my taxes for it. And I did vote for the $80 million referendum because I thought it was the right thing to do. 2 comments. 1, your 30-year tax projections, they assume that no additional bonds are going to be paid within 30 years. The last bond was 14 years. I think that's a presumption that is incorrect. And then, secondly, all the bonds in the past, from what I understand, have been 20-year bonds. Now this is a 30-year bond. Why is that? Because you're trying to reduce the interest cost, or the cost to the taxpayers. You also mentioned a state share. I don't understand what that is. Is that come off the $129 million, so it's less than that? Or in fact, is the real cost somewhere $150 to $160 million? Let me get to my points. I've worked in construction and real estate management my entire life. 5 years I worked for the New Jersey School Development Authority in designing and constructing schools, 5 in Elizabeth and 2 high schools in Egg Harbor Township and Long Branch. And I have noticed a number of things. One, by the way, none of those K through 8 schools had generators. They drained the pipes if there was a situation with freezing. But anyhow, what did I observe from this experience of working for the SDA? Well, 1, schools are generally over-designed by architects, striving to create state-of-the-art buildings regardless of the expense, because they're not paying the expense, we are. And the architect's fee is often related to the cost of the school. The more cost, the more the architect charges. Secondly, without early input from teachers and students and the community, design follows the architect's presumptions, not educational experience. Architects are not educators. 10 seconds? Already?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, we're going to be here an hour just with the people that we have, but finish your thoughts, please.
I'll tell you, my thought is this. I'll vote for $60 million for something that's reasonable, but there's been not enough planning in this and not enough thought, and if you want to split it, fine. But $60 million, especially considering that your bond council said that other school districts this size are passing or voting on referendums that are under $45 million. Why are we 3 times that? Something's wrong here.
Thank you. So, one question.
Can I raise my hand real quick?
Yes. Well, and just before you do, Bill, Mr. Madison had a question about the state aid and how the state aid state share works. Can you just explain that?
Yeah. So the state share is a debt service aid. So the $129 million, or in the case of question 1, the $80.8 million, that is the budget. The way the debt service aid is considered is in the estimated tax impact considers the offset from the debt service aid, which is the State Department of Education. When they issue your approval, they will say you are eligible for a certain percentage of principal and interest that's paid on the debt. That's considered in the tax impact figures you saw, but the costs are the budget is the budget. The 80.8 is the budget.
So
for question one.
So 80.8 is the budget, and then state aid comes off of the 88. It's not adding on to the 80. It's
State aid is considered in the debt service numbers you saw. So if you didn't have state aid, the tax impact figures would be higher for the 80.8 in question.
I understand, but the 80 does not, it's not net of state aid. 80 is a gross number.
Correct.
Yeah, so.
The budgeted number.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Monceau, and then on deck is Wiebke Martens.
Hello, my name is Susanna Monceau, and I live at 156 Moore Street. I want to thank you for holding the meeting, and I think you have been listening to us at least a little bit on the basis that you're thinking of splitting the referendum. I've sent the board a copy of a letter this afternoon, and I gave you out one, so you have that, so I won't go into that in detail. I do want to point out that my husband wrote that letter yesterday because he knew he wouldn't be able to attend because of work. We sent it to a few friends and neighbours, and we got 41 signatories within less than 20 hours. Had 5 people tell me they couldn't sign it because we support the idea of splitting the referendum. They do not support any referendum and intend to vote against it. So I think that gives you an idea of how the community's feeling. I've never not voted for a school referendum. I think it's been somewhat insulting at some of the previous meetings I've gone to, the suggestion that we're all anti-tax. None of us would be living in Princeton if we felt that way. Seriously, but I do think you have lost the trust. That was one of the people who wouldn't sign said you'd lost the trust of her, and she was a parent of children in the school, and she was waiting to vote you out and not to vote for this referendum. So that gives you a background. Anyway, we know that you're thinking of splitting the referendum into 2 tranches. I would urge you to consider very, very carefully what to put in the first tranche, the first referendum, and I would suggest clear, evidence-based criteria for what is absolutely essential. When I hear people saying things like, oh, that's industry standard, or we know that the generator has been used on some occasions, to me that's actually not enough at the moment. I think you need to know exactly how much everything is going to cost, why you need it. And I would urge you to remember, and I think that some of you are doing this, and maybe some of the rest of you speak up in private, but you represent the interests of the whole community. That includes taxpayers, parents, students, teachers, everybody who lives here, and you need to ask challenging questions on behalf of all of us, and I do not feel that yet that has been done enough, and I have come to most meetings and to most of the presentations. In our letter, we note that we still feel that there are many unanswered questions, and I'm just going to try and raise a few of them here because you have this 2-minute cap.
Yeah, and time is up, actually.
The ongoing, we've still heard nothing about the ongoing facilities and staffing costs associated with this new 5-6 school. All of this will require new people. I think you mentioned 23 at the last meeting of staff. Is the hiring of new staff exempt from the 2% cap on our taxes? Can you say, because we've got to have new staff, we don't have to follow that 2% cap? Because that means a very different thing than just this referendum, than just the money on our tax bill for the referendum. It means that every single year our tax bill, which reliably goes up by at least the cap every single year, will go up by beyond that cap. So I really would like to know, and I know it's been asked at other meetings, and I don't feel that I have got an answer to that question, so I think that you should consider that. I'd also like to ask, and this is maybe less relevant because if you are splitting out some of the high school thing, do you have evidence that the new pedagogy is beneficial? Quite apart from the fact you're going to have to train teachers. I am a teacher, and I have spoken to some teachers at the high school, and there may be some here today, and they can talk to this. But I have heard from teachers that they were asked either-or questions, not what would you like, but would you like this or this? So they didn't really have, that's not a lot of input if you're told you can have 1 or 2. If you want 3, it's not on there.
Sorry, Ms. Manso,
but
your
I
time's up.
certainly know as a teacher, I like walls. I like rooms where I can talk to people and they don't get to hear some other class going on. And if you need to do that, that's a different pedagogy. That also requires
Thank you very much.
training.
I had
and
a
So you have
question.
about 28 people behind you. So.
Yeah, I know, but I
I just
have a couple
I just
other
have a
things.
question to something. You said that we lost the trust of this
Yes.
person. What have we done to lose the trust?
She thinks that you haven't asked questions enough about this and that you have simply, I'm going to use her, you have rubber stamped what the school board's what the administration's wishes are rather than put some input from the community. And I'm not saying I think that, but I do ask you to ask the tough questions.
Well, before you go on, I just want to say, and maybe Steve and Scott can jump in, this has been a very transparent and inclusive process. We've included teachers, we've included parents, we've included children, we've included board members, community partners, and maybe, so as far as no process is perfect, as Jennifer said earlier, but you know, we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, listening to all the questions, and as I said when we voted on the initial referendum in April, on April 24th, we said at that time, this is changing. It will change right up to the day we vote to submit it to the Department of Education, and that we would welcome feedback, and the referendum would evolve, and it did. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything?
Sure. Very, very quickly, in response to your question about the operating costs of the new 5-6 school, we've addressed that a couple of times in open presentations. I did say that there were about 22 new staff, ranging from principal to secretary to nurse to custodian to child study team members, and that the cost would be around $1.5 million. For those new staff. That doesn't include the 5-6 teachers. The 5th grade teachers would be coming from the elementary school. The 6th grade teachers would be coming from the middle school. So we have been, I think, transparent about what we're anticipating to be the operating costs. We haven't yet figured the energy costs for that building. We're hoping it's going to be relatively low because it will be a sustainable design. The question about can we go above the 2% cap? Up until 2016, school districts could go above the cap. There was a waiver for opening of a new school. We have learned that that is no longer in code, so we are going to have to then budget for those additional staff within the 2%, or if there is a waiver for increased enrollment, then we'll have to bank some of that and plan for that increase in staff for the new 5-6 school.
Okay, so you can't, what you're saying is you can't go above the 2% cap.
Okay.
There is not a waiver for opening a new school.
Right. And I will obviously finish, and I know there are other people, but I would point out
It's not
that,
fair. We have rules. We have rules. I'm sorry.
Sure, but that's when you say that there's a lot of input. There isn't, because we're all kept to 2 minutes, and we haven't been that involved.
There's more of you than just you. So there'll be an hour at least of discussion.
Hi.
Sorry, Ms.
And I
Martins, and
yes.
on deck is Joel Schwartz.
I think it'll be helpful to have the clock on the screen. I asked Mrs. Kennedy if that's possible. I know when you're speaking, it's impossible to keep track of the time, so maybe if we can do that.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Wiebke Martens. I'm a mother of an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, one of them about to enter JW, the other the high school. I just wanted to react to a few points that have been mentioned here. So one is that perhaps the impression is that at the moment we have state-of-the-art schools here. I mean, that's not the case. We have old schools from the 50s, and nothing has been done for many years. I've been to the Littlebrook Elementary School. I've been to JW. These are not state-of-the-art schools. They're old schools. The other point I wanted to make, I'm deeply worried about splitting this into 2 questions. It seems to me that if I had a choice between question 1 and question 2, automatically I would think, well, question 2 is not that important. I'll just vote on question 1 because 2 can be pushed down the road. But it seems to me that we can't push it very far down the road because the need is there. So I'm deeply worried about splitting this and giving the town the idea that there's something they can push down the road when there's not. The other thing I'm worried about, looking at how question 1 is structured, is I see some things that I'm sure are essential. I don't know, fitness centers, athletic fields. I'm sure critics will come and say this is not necessary. This is only luxury. How can we even say yes to question 1 if we have all these items that are just silver spoons in question 1? I'm sure they're not, but I'm just saying in terms of positioning it, it seems to me that even question 1 has some elements where I would think as a skeptical voter, is this really necessary? So I'm really worried that this might not pass. The third question, the tax impact. I just wanted to say something about that. I feel, yes, everybody's worried about taxes. Nobody wants their taxes to go up. But it seems to me that even though we have this cap on state taxes, the tax reform gave many of us lower taxes for the next 2 or 3 years. Those benefits will expire within 3 or 4 years, and then general taxes will go up. So it's better to act now. It'll be more difficult later. And the last point last point I did want to make. You've been hearing from some residents that they're worried about this, and we're all worried about the taxes. But I think you've only heard from a very small segment of the population. I think a large part of the population hasn't even realized that they need to be thinking about this now. They think they can think about this in October. They don't realize that, people are haggling now. Let's get it down to 60 million. They don't realize the process that is going on now. They think they have till October. So you've only been hearing from a small part of this population. Sorry, I've gone over 20 seconds.
Okay, Mr. Schwartz, and then on deck is Yina Moore.
Other people go ahead of me.
Okay. So Yina Moore, surprise, you're up now. And
I just have to make a quick comment.
Sure.
On the athletics, I don't think athletics are a luxury. Try not to get emotional here, but the last 2 years, we've started the school year out with some tragedies, and I'm hoping that will never happen again. And in my own family, I've seen the benefit of being on a team for kids, and that if I had my way, every kid in this high school and every kid in the school would be on an athletic team because they'd have the camaraderie, and when they're down, they'd have teammates. So I have trouble thinking of athletics as luxury. So I hope people don't think of anything that contributes to our kids being part of something, whether it's the arts or athletics, that it's a luxury. So, okay. I didn't cry good.
Thanks, Bill.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Just before you start, Ms. Moore, next on deck is it says Stephanie Chorney maybe. And so she left. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
So then on deck would be Lisa Jack now.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Yina Moore. The splitting of the referendum seems to be logical, but I do agree with many, including Mr. Hare, that it could still use some tweaking. I think that children are most important, and unfortunately, while this is a capital spending referendum, which is the only way we can actually raise money in this form, it doesn't address really the needs that we're talking about with those who have to have special educational needs addressed, despite the advantages and as well as the new assets for sports. There are some of the basic educational requirements still that need to be addressed. I was happy to hear that there, at the end of your discussion about generators, that the community service aspect of the school buildings is very important, and that it's really around the relief and the response mode that these buildings would be most useful in terms of having auxiliary power. But it need not be in the form of generators. I wasn't sure if every building you talked about were going to have solar panels, but those solar panels could be actually tied to batteries that would be on a continual refill instead of depletable diesel-powered generators. Second, my real concern about the $12 million for the new facility, which I understand is really a real estate development venture that the school system is sort of entering into. It's going to be their office building, your office building, and it will also generate revenues from other tenants. And I want to know how that plays into what are obviously going to be increased operating costs for new construction and new facilities that we are, proposing to build, and also the educational aspects, which we aren't allowed to increase because of the cap. So if you could actually answer those two questions, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Then you take, and on deck is Ralph Perry.
Are we going to talk about?
Yes.
the Thanet
Anyone
question?
want to take a?
I mean, personally, I'm excited about Thanet because it's so much better of a deal than the other property. The fact that we have a tenant in one of the buildings that will be paying us money that goes into the operating revenue. I mean, if there's questions raised about how we're going to fund here, and if we have another source of revenue coming in, it means we don't have to raise those taxes. Something gets covered that way. That second building, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if that could be rented out and revenue comes in from there, so we don't need to, so that we help cover the costs here.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I know the Thanet property gives us options down the road. It's 15 acres in the center of town. Two buildings will be occupying 2/3 of one of those buildings. So for now, the rental income of $200,000 a year, that's a number of teaching positions. That will help us get up and going perhaps with the new school. It's not as if we would necessarily keep tenants there forever, because we also have a vision when we started this process of expanding our preschool for the community, which is, I think for me, looking cradle to kindergarten in terms of closing the achievement gap is a really important thing. So that's a possibility for us, is that we use that space to expand our preschool. We could conceivably use that space to expand our athletic fields, which we do need. And down the road, it's a possibility that we could use that space to build a future school 20, 30, 40 years from now if we need that in Princeton. So I think there are advantages to having a 15-acre piece of property that is so close in proximity to all of our schools and to the and walking distance from the shopping center, for example.
And I just wanted to answer about the special educational needs. So at the 5-6 school, I think 7 of those 23 positions have to do with special education. And one of the things that I like about the 5-6 school, and again, my children will not be able to take part in that, is that we're not going to have 1,000 kids at JW. Right now we have 730 kids, and it's 140 over capacity. What I like about the 5-6 school is it gives the kids another touch point. It gives them a chance in a smaller environment to get to know people. And, special education is a big part of the design for the 5-6 school.
It actually is, so that the way the spaces are designed, they really appeal to a variety of different learning styles, and it allows for the teacher collaboration that often doesn't happen if you have special education teachers who are now in a classroom all by themselves and don't get to interact with their colleagues the way that we're setting up the design. Teachers can interact directly with special education teachers interact directly with their colleagues and across subjects, and that's beneficial to all kids. So the design actually helps us with our mission in that regard.
In response to Yana's question, I also want to just direct everyone, if you haven't already looked on the district website under the referendum, there's a document that is the strategic plan and the referendum, and it gives, I think, a pretty good overview of the specific ways that the proposals that we're talking about relate to the ongoing strategic objectives of the district. So I think that's helpful.
So each of those 5 goals of wellness, of every child known, of closing the achievement gap, of innovation in teaching and learning, and of community and care and connectedness, each of those 5 goals has ties then to specific aspects of the referendum design.
And just to highlight what the superintendent said about early childhood education, we know from the research that if there's one thing you can do that will have the most impact on trying to reduce the achievement gap, it's early childhood education. So for me, I was extremely excited about the possibility of us being able to expand that for our community.
I guess on Thanet, just Ms. Moore, just to give my own 2 cents. one of the problems with doing a referendum is you have to make choices, and they're not always the best. No matter what choice you do, you're going to, close off other possibilities, and one thing that satisfies one person is going to upset another person. It's just the way it goes. And so, the choice we had with Thanet is there's very little land in this community. The other potential possibility we had was a piece of land up that used to be owned by Save, up by TD Bank, almost in Montgomery. And so that was one, potential. It was very expensive relative to Thanet. So Thanet has, as Steve mentioned, a lot of space, and that's probably good for the future. I'm a little skeptical of the $200,000 of rental income. I kind of like our school administrators to focus on kids and not be a landlord. And so that bothers me a little bit. I think something we'll have to talk about is how we manage that and not get distracted and go into the real estate business. I don't want to be in the real estate business as a board member. But compared to the Save property, it's a great deal, and it does have some future benefits that a lot of people describe. So we'll keep working on that, at least in my view, and see what we can do to improve it. But it's certainly a good thing to have that kind of space, I think, at that price. So Ms. Jack now, and then again Mr. Perry on deck.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jack now. I've lived in Princeton for 8 years. I live on Ferran Road, and I have 2 kids entering 5th and 7th grade. First, I want to thank you all for all the time that you've put into this. The referendum started with an explanation of our district's needs, and I feel like the people that have supported what you're doing haven't spoken out. If you don't like what's being said, you're being much more vocal. And so I want you to keep that in your minds when you think about, it sounds like you've gotten so much pushback that you're talking about changing things up and should we do 2 questions as opposed to 1. And I just want you to think about the fact that you've probably heard more from the naysayers than the people that support what's happening. And I think we need to go back to where it all started, which is that all of our schools are at or above capacity. The high school right now might not be projected to peak as soon as the middle school, but my understanding is the high school is the most over capacity right now of all of our schools. So to push that off really, really scares me. If it could become a second question that might not get approved or be pushed off for a future referendum, I don't support that. I think it's essential right now. At my elementary school at Johnson Park, I've seen class sizes increase every year that my children are there. That's not what I signed up for when I moved to Princeton. We can't be the Princeton Public Schools and pay our high taxes without getting the smaller class sizes in return. That's one of the reasons I moved here. We can't be Princeton Public Schools and have the needs of children with learning issues not be met because the teachers can't stay on top of so many students. We can't be the Princeton Public Schools and not have a high school with a robust STEM program. That's our future. Or maybe loss of other important specials because we ran out of room to house them. Number 1, we must meet our children's needs and we must house them properly so that they can learn. Personally, I'm willing to pay a few extra $100s a year as opposed to tens of thousands of dollars a year for private school tuition to get the smaller class sizes that I wanted when I moved to Princeton. And addressing the capacity needs, I think, is our most critical issue. Security, additionally, is a critical need that cannot be pushed off. To those with no children in the public school, property value is highly affected by the quality of our schools, and the Princeton reputation is on the line if we do nothing. And to those with children in the public schools, maybe there's a more obvious desire to make the changes, and exactly how we do that can be debated, as Patrick just said. What one person likes, another's not. So we could go back and forth for years, and we're never going to all agree, because our Board of Ed's regularly gaining and losing representatives, and we're just going to keep having to start over. Nearly everyone I've spoken to supports the referendum. So I say listen to the public critics and continue to work at saving costs wherever we can. But let's keep this as 1 question so we can approve it and we can keep our district's integrity and our top-rated schools top-rated.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Perry, and then on deck is Kip Cherry.
Hi, I'm Ralph Perry, and I, excuse me, I want to thank Steve for sending out the letter and telling us that there is a question of how does it affect the community, not just the school. And all I want to talk is about taxes. And I would like to just give you an idea what is going to happen here. Right now, if the $129.6 million bond goes through, the effect on the average house in Princeton is going to be approximately $1,000 in year one. That house has an average price assessment of $834,000. 50% of that is $420,000. And on that house, the school tax is going to go up by $500. The person who lives in a house in Princeton, which is assessed at $430,000, can ill afford to pay another $500. That would be even money that he would have to take out from his children or from the food that he puts on the table, or especially if they are retired and live on Social Security and a small pension. $500 is a hell of a lot of money. People talk about, oh, so it's going to cost a few $100s. This is $1,000. That's the first number. The second number that comes up is all the other auxiliary expenses that go with $129 million, plus the usual so-called 2% increase every year. And by the time we get to the third year of this $129 million, the school taxes could go up 16 to 20%. That is a big number. You people have a decision to make in 7 days. Next week, you're going to vote on what kind of a bond you're going to put through. And I just learned a couple of things today which are disturbing. The real estate in Princeton is practically on hold. And between January the 1st and April the 1st, only 4 houses above $2 million were sold. There are 39 houses on the market, and since April, they haven't been sold, and people don't even look at them. The lesser houses, some interesting phenomena happens. People rent the houses. People come to Princeton and say, hey, we don't want to buy a house in here. We just want to rent. It's cheap. You rent a house for $5,000, and that's cheap. Somebody lives in there. I could have somebody rent my house for $5,000, probably more than that, and they're going to move in there with 2 kids, and you got 2 more kids in the system. They don't pay any taxes. I don't pay any more taxes if I rent my house. There is a shift in here.
Mr. Perry, time's up.
The shift is basically because of what's happening all over the place. First of all, we have no more deduction for taxes paid. I mean, we have $10,000, which takes care of taxes.
Sir, your time's up now.
The 7% tax, the other taxes that they are, which means that the average house that we were talking about, the 834, pays just about $20,000 in taxes. 10,000 of those are not going to be deductible.
Thank you.
That's a rise in your cost. Our good governor just raised the taxes.
Mr. Perry, your time's up.
Okay. All I can say is you have to cut down. Like Peter said here before, $60 to $70 million bond is doable. The average house will pay $540 in taxes in year one, and then it will go down after that. And that is manageable. Even the lower one will pay $250.
Thank you.
You must take into account the taxes that people pay. Regardless, the school has 3 pieces that you can look at. What you must do, like security, air conditioning, things like that. The roof is leaking. What you want to do, which is needed, and what you like to have.
Okay, Mr. Perry, thank you. Time's up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Kip, and And then next is Leighton Newland.
I'm Kip Cherry. My concern is this. We haven't reduced any of the total costs. We're still at $130 million, which is a huge amount of money. We're talking about splitting up a bond issue, which is fine, but we're not reducing the cost of the project. I don't think we're getting a quality project. A good quality project is one that is really well thought out, and we don't have a good plan, a good building program to actually give to the architect so that the design is good and tight. We are spending a lot of money. We're throwing money at it, but we aren't really thinking this through. The survey that was done by the students in the high school, for instance, emphasized totally different activities or spaces than are in your plans. So I don't think you've listened to people all that well. There may have been some discussions, but have there really been interactive, detailed discussions? A good program defines the space in very great detail. It gives the size of the space, it defines the amenities in the space. That's not in the program that you submitted to DOE. So that's the first point I want to make. Secondly, on the 5th and 6th grade school, I'm extremely disappointed about the limestone arch. It was supposed to be integrated into the building from the very beginning. I feel that you have actually been insincere about that. But I would like to also point out one other thing. To demolish this building will cost over $1 million. We're sitting in a room that's in very good shape. Why not design a building that will include this space in the new building? You're wasting a lot of money, and I think it's really unnecessary. This space is in perfectly fine condition and can be reused, should not be torn down. Thirdly, the Thanet property is a money pit. I don't think you guys really understand what you're getting into. This space, which is, they're very nice looking buildings for those who just go and look at the buildings, but they're empty. There's one tenant in there. They're not easy to rent. If they were easy to rent, they would have renters in there now. So you're talking about taking on a huge risk as landlords. You don't know anything about what you're doing. You don't know how to get renters into those buildings. So I think that you really have not thought that out well at all. Finally, I just want to say that I think you really need to rethink what you're doing, and I think that there is time. The actual population in the high school, the enrollment's going down. I'm confused about the numbers for the 5th and 6th grade school because the number I have of kids coming up from the 4th and 5th grades is 477. So I think we need to understand those numbers better. I'd like to have them peer reviewed. I'd like to have the enrollment, the capacity, the cost estimates, all this stuff peer reviewed. And I think it would serve all of you really well to know whether or not you've got a good plan, take another year, figure this out. Thank you.
Thanks, Kip.
Hey, Pat.
Yes. Go ahead, Bill. Leighton's not here. Okay. Go ahead, Bill.
So, Kip, I really think that having the arch in the courtyard looks wonderful to me. It's when you look at that picture, it's the thing that you see the most. I can't think of a more prominent way to display the arch. I mean, if you have it embedded in some doorway, that's all you. I don't know, Kip, are you hearing me back there? Or you were walking around, but I just going to say I really think having the archway in the courtyard is really a great way to display it. When I saw that.
That way. It was supposed to be integrated in the building in perpetuity. That's what the idea was. It's an historic arch. We really should save more of the building, as I've just said. I think it would be economic to save more of the building anyway.
We analyzed saving this building. It was not cost effective. We listened very carefully to you and to the Historical Society about the arch and the history of this building as one of the first integrated schools in Princeton, and we want to celebrate that history. And by placing the main arch not as a window in the wall that students will never really interact with, but as the main thing they see when they pull up to the building, that they'll walk through it every day, that they'll gather there at recess, that they'll meet their parents there at the end of the day or on the weekend. It's going to be a place that we can put a quote over that celebrates the idea of integration, and we can have opportunities to write about the history. So I think it's actually a design that elevates the history of that building, and that makes it truly a child-centered. It's a learning institution, and so how can we best teach kids about the history of this place? I think the arch is placed as it is one way to really do that. And So I just want you to know we were listening. We may disagree about how to use the history of this building and the arch, but I think that it's placed in a place that is going to be child-centered and focused for our kids.
Well, just a thought on that arch, Steve. When was this district desegregated? 1950? 40? 47? That's shocking to me. That this school district was segregated until 1947. Like, maybe in that arch you should say, keep in mind that this school right here was segregated until 1947. Not that, oh boy, it got integrated in 1950. Aren't we great?
Well,
it's like, kind of the opposite.
It's about celebrating the value that
well,
history
we should remember
represents.
the injustices of all that as well.
Yes.
So anyway.
Can I also, when I think about arches, I go run through the campus in the morning, and Nassau and Witherspoon Street, you have that entrance arch there, and every time I run through it, I always go to the left, not through the main part. And I can't help but noticing it every day as I drive through town, and I would think this arch would come out the same way.
It's going to be in the daily consciousness of our kids, placed where it is now. Integrated into the wall, it really won't be.
And can I make one other? On Thanet, Kip, Stephanie and I are working on stuff with that. We're not just wanting to be landlords. There's more stuff we're exploring about ways to make this a revenue opportunity over at Thanet while the building exists. So we're not just looking for Stephanie to be the landlord and go deal with the broken plumbing whenever they call. But I mean, there's ways that we can make that into a revenue that aren't. I don't think you're giving us enough credit for what we're intending to do.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
So at the high school, when I pick up my kid, I'm like, are you at the PAC or the flagpole? And honestly, at Valley Road, kids are going to say, meet me at the arch, meet me at the arch, I'll see you at the arch. I mean, it's going to be, kind of what, like the tower, it's going to be what you think of with Valley Road. So I think it's going to just really continue to grow as a school.
Thanks.
Pat, can I just make
Sure, go ahead.
one more thing? And I just wanted to, I had the honor of listening to the planning board listen to the long-range facilities plan from the district. And one of the things that struck me as part of the discussion there was what this location means in terms of the community and in terms of how it integrates with the master plan for Princeton. And the idea that we're going to take this and create a school, a 5-6 school that's close to Community Park, it's close to John Witherspoon Middle School, that's bikeable, that's walkable, that's sustainable. It fits in so many different ways with the vision that we, as citizens here in Princeton, have for our community going forward in the future. I don't know, Scott, if you want to say anything else, but I was very pleased to hear those aspects that you and Stephanie highlighted at the planning board.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so I didn't, Mr. Nielsen, I didn't give you any warning, but because the last speaker's not here, so Ron Nielsen, if you're here. And then on deck is Peter Thompson.
Hi, I'm Ron Nielsen. I'm a resident. I don't have any kids or grandkids in the school system. I do have a couple of questions about the bonds. It strikes me, first of all, that overlaying this new bunch of bonds over the last remaining 3 tranches of the old bond is going to cause a higher rate of interest to be required, which will cost us more than it would if we didn't have that last remaining set of 3 years worth of bonds. The other question I have is, I'm very unclear as to whether or not these cost estimates included the interest and underwriting costs for the bonds. That would be my only question on this at this time.
Thank you. Stephanie, do you want to answer the interest question?
Well, the answer of the bond costs and everything, it is included in the estimate costs. So that, I guess, was your second question.
It is included?
Yes.
What's the interest rate?
We don't have
market rate, right?
But what are we assuming?
Market rate.
No,
You
well,
must
no,
if it's
so
included,
no,
you must
the,
know what the market rate is.
In November.
Then how can you include it now in these numbers?
It's an estimate.
It's an estimate. It's actually, I think they 4.5, 4.75. I think we looked at a number of different rates because we would be using the money over several years.
Yeah, so they estimated using a range of interest rates. They're anticipating several bond issuances that range between 4.25 to 4.75.
Yep.
Thank you.
And after Mr. Thompson, we have Amy no last name, but
So I'm Peter Thompson, Horner Lane since 1964, so I've been around town a couple years. I didn't hear any discussion about the potential ESIP, Energy Savings Investment Plan component that's been in previous proposals as a $19.5 million number. I may have missed it when you went over the numbers, but I'm curious how that fits into the question 1, question 2 options. Where, is it spread across it? Is it weighted one or the other? It sounds like it's more in the base question and how that would affect the funding over the period of the referendum bond. And on the admin updated number of the $12.6 million, is that the property purchase for 6.5 plus 6.1 million in improvements, or is that 6.5 million for purchase of the property plus another number for the improvement, plus 12 million for improvements? That wasn't clear to me.
You're first.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's important that it's 6.5 for the property and 6.1 approximately for the improvements, because if you go online, there are a lot of people interpreting it in various ways. And on the same topic, there are a lot of people who have a lot more to say than you can fit into 2 or 3 minutes. Could anyone suggest an efficient way to get their full presentation of, concerns, comments, whatever, to the board in particular? Something better than just throwing it up on Planet Princeton or something like that.
Can I have a suggestion?
Thank you.
So once we go through our first round, could people then come up and everyone will have got something in their first 2 minutes, and then people who want to stay can. We won't get home.
Well,
but
I would suggest we do get lots of emails from people. A public forum, even we on the board don't get to speak for half an hour at a time or whatever. So that's just the nature of public meetings and oral communication, unless you're giving a speech. But our email addresses are on the website, and if you'd like to put further comments, you can reach all 10 of us at once. I believe there's a way to do that just in one board anyway, there's the 10 of our emails are, but that's probably the easiest thing to do for more detailed
The
comments.
referendum email.
Referendum@PrincetonK12.org.
I thought so. Okay, thank you. So
And then we all get it.
yes, so we'll all get it, and that's an easy way to make your thoughts known.
Referendum@PrincetonK12.org.
Okay.
So, if I may, the presentation I gave tonight was relatively focused on the question 1, question 2. The ESIP, absolutely still in the scenario. An ESIP, for those of you who don't know, energy improvements that save enough energy to pay for themselves over 15 years or less can be packaged and advanced by the board. They would actually be advanced. They kind of stand off to the side of the 2 questions. They're not integrated into either. So improvements that are needed, like building control systems to be more efficient mechanical equipment, energy efficient lighting, so forth and so on, have been identified and would be advanced in a way that they self-fund, meaning they don't add to the referendum cost and they don't cost the district capital because they produce the savings adequate to fund themselves over a period of 15 years. It's a program that's overseen by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. The projects have to be submitted through them for approval. There's a very specific process. So we will do presentations in the future when we can get into more detail on that. But I wanted to let you know that's not been
So you
forgotten.
fund the full amount, and then if you get some of that up to 19 million you're estimating, that would reduce the cost and free up funds for other pieces of it potentially?
No, the scope that would be advanced into the ESIP is not in the projects you saw here.
So it's not
right.
included, it's in
It's
addition.
separate. So, for example, LED lighting in the schools, which will improve the quality of the lighting and also greatly improve energy efficiency, is not in those project costs, but it would be advanced as an ESIP.
Okay.
So it doesn't add to the referendum cost, and it doesn't cost the district capital money.
Okay, thank you.
can I ask a question? Does it cost operating money for the district to do those, like the LED lighting sample?
Well, it saves operating money because it reduces your energy
But to get the
use.
bulbs themselves?
Again, there's a net savings. So once you consider the cost of putting in the lighting against the savings that lighting produces over 15 years, the savings have to exceed the cost.
But just, I put LED lighting bulbs in my office, so I had to buy them initially myself, but I know that my electrical bill went down by a third. Are we talking about that we would buy the lights out of our operating budget?
So, no. So an ESIP is funded through a certain type of bond. It's called a savings obligation bond. Basically, it's a bond that's structured on the savings, so it does not come out of your capital. It is paid for under a separate bond, but a separate bond that the costs of which are offset by the energy savings that those improvements
So it doesn't
create.
come out of our capital or our operating?
Correct.
Can I just ask, I know we have to, in order to initiate the ESIP, that we have to complete the energy audit, right? So can I just ask where we are with that?
I actually received the hard copy letter today that said everything is, we've been approved for all 6 locations to be energy audit. Now we're on their schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, Greg, go ahead.
Oh, and just really briefly, I just wanted to let the public know that our superintendent and Scott Downey are going to be doing another presentation at the library the morning of Saturday, July 21st. And we wanted to do it so for people who can't make tonight or July 17th meetings, this is going to be a question and answer only. And so this is another opportunity for the public to learn more. And what we've asked the superintendent and our architect to do is also focus on process questions. In the past, why we've gotten to where we are now, what were the options that were considered and we decided not to go with, but also process questions for the future as well. So I'm really excited that they're able to do that, and I'm also very thankful to the library for offering the space on Saturday morning for the community.
Okay. Did I say on deck is Mary Clerman? So, yeah.
Okay.
So there you are. Amy?
All right, Amy Kraft. I have 2 children. One's going into 8th, one's going to 10th. First of all, I want to say thank you. I appreciate the process you've gone through and the transparency. And I do recognize that it has been a very transparent process and that you do put a lot of thought into this. And I do understand how you came up with the Q1, Q2 formulation. I don't support it because I think it trades off some certainty for JW and the elementary schools and sacrifices the high school. And I think it will sacrifice the high school because I think when it comes to it, the public looks to the board. The public just doesn't have the public in general, and I support what was said earlier, that the public at large is not here tonight and this is not on the radar, right? Because it's summer, they're on vacation and they're out or, they're busy. And they think that they'll vote for it in the fall. And so in general, people don't have a lot of attention. And so when they look to the board to tell them what the school needs, and they look to the board to make that trade-off, and of course the board is going to consider the community as well. That is your responsibility, and you have a fiduciary responsibility to think about the town as well. All right, and so when the town says Q1, Q2, I just think that and everybody here is excited about the trade-off because they know that Q2 is not going to happen, at least not right away. I just don't think Q2 is going to happen. Not now, and I'm not think it's going to happen in a few years either. I think you're sacrificing the high school for a good long while, and I worry about the students. So,
you recognize that we're adding about a capacity of 100 student classrooms.
The 4 classrooms?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I think everyone should recognize that everyone should recognize that that's, we worked together to make sure that was in there, and I'm excited that the high school is getting that because,
right.
I've got the demographic data open in front of me, and
right.
If we're
but we're already over 100 over,
yeah.
And we know all about the overcrowding in the hallways, the mosh pit that's the hallways, and we know about the issue that is the dining hall and the fact. And I'm worried about the low income students that have to buy lunch. Right, and how they don't have any time to buy lunch. That's, that just seems really horrible. So these are the concerns, and the social concerns. Well, anyway, I'm glad you put the 4 classrooms in. I really am.
Good.
I'm just I just worry about, I just think that people look to the school board to tell them, like, this is what our schools need.
Yeah.
And when you break it up and say Q2, it's sort of like, we don't really need that. You know,
Thank you.
and
Thank
so
you.
I
Yeah.
just
Amy.
worry. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Can I
Appreciate it.
ask you one question? I mean, in some ways, what I like about having the Q2, and even if you're right and it doesn't pass, and hopefully it will, and some of us think it will, hey, suppose that we do a really amazing job with the results of Q1, and everybody goes, I love the new 5-6 school, the new Valley Road School, whatever its name would be. Everybody likes what's done. They like what we've done at the high school. I would like to think then that people will say, okay, financially, it's being pushed off into the future, and that's really good, the bond payments, and what they did really worked.
I've become a pessimist in the last few years, just looking at how our democracy is working, and I just don't see a lot of examples, even when public servants are doing really good public service, they're not getting credit for it. So I don't really have a lot of high hopes of that happening. Even if it's doing really great, I think that there can be a few people that have a little gripe, you know, and they're on Planet Princeton or on, you know, social media, and it becomes, this tiniest little thing becomes the biggest thing. And you can do the greatest work and it doesn't matter.
Thank you.
So.
I never feel that way.
Mary Clerman, Harris Road. Sure.
Peter Carroll.
I've been listening to the comments here, and I appreciate the sincerity of all the board members. I somehow have to question the sincerity of the whole idea. It's been a very nice performance. The presentation was a good performance, but in my view, what you did was you said again and again and again the same things, and you answered your own questions instead of giving full information. So some of the things that I question about this, or for instance, it was mentioned that some athletic facilities would be added. How much are those going to cost? $5 million? Is that what we really need? Do we need $5 million worth of improvements in athletic facilities? If you're going to put in air conditioning and then you're going to expand the buildings, are you going to have to change and move the air conditioning? Is that going to cost something else again? You talk about kicking the can down the road. What we're really asking you to do is not kick the can down the road, but simply to think about it and give time to thinking about it before you actually do something on it. I've just lost my place here, so you talk about a town hall. You offered us a town hall, and you gave us a generous hour in which citizens were supposed to be able to talk, not just for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but then 3/4 of that time was devoted to repeating the same information that had been delivered again and again and again, without actually discussing or answering or addressing in a community kind of way the kind of things that people in Princeton ask. Princeton people are thoughtful people. They're intelligent people with experience and local experience. They're not architects and specialists from outside. They're not paid. They're offering free advice and free feedback, and it really needs to be considered in a collegial kind of way, not just, okay, you're asking this, okay, we'll move to the next question. It's true you've given many notices, many public notices, but I actually gave to the school board the access to the email addresses of thousands or at least hundreds of people who might oppose and thousands who might support or oppose. And I saw that notices were sent to those people once. The additional meetings, they were not received, they were not sent. So when the last piece went out to community members, the only community members that it got to were the handful of people who have been at meetings and given their email addresses, not to the thousands of people who are actually going to have to vote.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, can I ask you a quick question?
Before you go,
I mean, do you
just
feel like, okay.
with the emails, that's inadvertent. Part of the reason we gathered the emails was to keep community members without children informed, and that's something that our assistant superintendent for curriculum will look into and make sure that you're getting all the emails that are being sent about the referendum.
But it's really hasn't been happening, and it could have happened, and I just don't understand that. You know, it just makes a bad impression.
She said we're going to look into it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, but it hasn't been done, and it should have been done to begin with.
Yeah.
That's
And-
all.
Thank you for letting us know.
Do you feel like we're answering the questions tonight that are being raised?
Somebody just said no. I think, again, that your presentation was a defense of your position. It was not a discussion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carroll, and then on deck is Joel Schwartz.
Hi. I got my own stopwatch. So, that's right. So, my name is Pete Carell. I was in the first class in JW to open up the school, graduated in high school. My sister graduated also. My two kids went from K to high school, and I went to school with a young man over there. And I've lived in here for 51 years. So I have four quick points I want to bring up. One is, it would help me if you could provide a tabular diagram of my tax burden for years 1, 2, 3, for all the way down, because I'm not quite sure if in year 4 my taxes go down $1,000 under option 1. My taxes go down in option 1, or on average they go down. On average they go down $1,000, because if you tell me, and $1,000 from year 3 or $1,000 from now, because if you tell me they go down $1,000 from now, I'm thinking I'm going to buy you a beer. That's a good deal. But I don't know if that's the case. So it would help me if you just had a table that would show that.
It's from now.
Is it from now? Okay, that's good. But if we could just show it, that would be good. Second, splitting the question up is to me, that's a little myopic to me. It's like, well, the patient can't handle the big pill, so let's give them the little pill and we'll put the other pill down. I mean, I think the probability that the second part gets approved is kind of low, but I'm also pessimistic, so be that as it may. Third is, if we could look to privatize or private finance some of the core glitzier issues, that maybe that would help, like the track or something, like things which maybe do not have broad appeal, because Princeton has a lot of rich people, they have a lot of big egos, and they would love to see their name with a big brass plaque over that says the Joe Jones track. Fourth is, and I got 12 seconds, is more of a technical thing, but the increase in students bring with them an increase in revenue base. So, or they don't. Okay, well, you can't answer that question. I got 2 seconds. I got 17 seconds over there. So those people, those extra students, I would think bring in extra revenue, and that revenue would reduce the tax burden going forward, unless that number is not so great. So I'd like some clarification on where that math, to me, there's a bit of a math imbalance there. Sorry, I was 21 seconds over.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
I mean, should we explain a bit of that to him?
Yeah, Pete, good to see you.
Yeah,
So your last question about the increase in students and increase in revenue, I've heard that fallacy a few times, so it's a point of confusion for people. We have a 2% cap in the tax levy. That's the state law. That's how much we can raise the tax levy is 2%. So that may be in the range of $1.6 million a year. That's regardless of the number of students. If the enrollment is falling in a district, that's fine, or staying the same. That 2% helps to cover inflation rates, contractual increases for staff. When you have rising enrollment, you run into a ceiling. You don't get additional funding for additional students unless they're coming from our sending district, and then we actually get tuition for those students. But for Princeton students, we don't get additional funding. We may, in some cases, get a waiver from the state to go over the 2% cap on the tax levy for more sustained enrollment over time. But that's an opportunity for us to still have to go back out to the taxpayers. They still have to pay. It's not as if we're getting additional money from the state for increased enrollment or from any other source.
I don't want to take up people's, maybe we could have a deeper discussion on it.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schwartz. And then on deck is, I can't read your last name, but Alice Arts. Thank you.
My name is Joel Schwartz. I've lived in Princeton for 38 years. My two daughters went to PPS. A moment ago, the board was asking, have we answered your questions? So I have a few questions that I don't believe have been answered, and I would appreciate if you would answer them not just tonight verbally, but in writing, so that people can evaluate the answers. And I'll give you an example. Steve earlier tonight, in response to a question about the operating cost of the new 5-6 school, indicated that he'd answered that question previously and said there would be about 22 new staff members and about $1.5 million for that. But the staffing costs for the new school are not the only operating costs. There's air conditioning. There's plowing the snow in the wintertime. There's the operations of the cafeteria. There are a whole lot of costs that are not just the faculty. So what I ask you to do is present the entire picture of the 5-6 school in writing. Put out a spreadsheet and says these are the operating costs. Because at the end of the day, the people who are concerned about the dollars are all green, whether it's a capital cost or an operating cost. So tell us what the big picture is. Present the 5-6 school as a complete package. The questions, we spent a huge amount of time splitting hairs over what the interest rate might be on the referendum borrowing costs, but we don't have a picture of the operating costs. There are many things which will happen as a result of the referendum, the capital costs that are spent to make capital improvements, which will trigger ongoing operating costs. So we always hear about the $837,000 house, but we don't hear about the ongoing operating costs year after year after year. They're not 30-year costs, right? They're forever costs. 30-year costs. My understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong at your convenience, is that in the past, bond issues have been for 20 years. This is a 30-year bond issue. We're going to borrow money for 30 years to pay for desks and computers.
No, we're not.
Not computers.
Yeah, not
Okay.
computers.
Can you explain to us that the 30-year borrowing will only pay for things which have a life expectancy of 30 years or more? That's a question I've heard asked many times. If the answer is no, then it's like going to Best Buy and buying something for 30 years and putting it on your credit card and paying the interest for 30 years. It would be great for you to explain why the 30-year bond. Many people have come to the conclusion that it's being presented that way because it lowers the annual debt service, but long-term, it's a mortgage on the future of everyone who lives in Princeton. Another aspect of operating costs.
That's time. That was.
Finish your thought, Joel, but
So my
but
question
it
is,
a 2-minute limit.
I'll make this brief. I'd ask you to present us a clear picture on Thanet. All of the costs, not just the capital costs, but the operating costs. Steve said earlier that Thanet gives us options. Well, one of the options it gives you is to be the owner of 110,000 square feet when you only need about 20,000. There are 22,000 square feet in this two-story building, of which perhaps 15,000 square feet are actually used. There's a 10-foot hallway out there, and no office building has a 10-foot hallway. There's some office space in the one-story space. There's about 16, 17, maybe 18,000 square feet, all in, used in this facility. You're buying a 110,000 square foot building, two buildings with 110,000 square feet. The people who've owned that building have desperately tried to rent it. You guys wake up, you, Steve, wake up early in the morning and try to be the best educator you can. We appreciate that. The people who own that building wake up early in the morning and try to be the best real estate developers they can. Somehow, they haven't done so, and the cost of their failure to do so is $239,000 a year in property tax. So when you talk about Thanet, please explain to us what happens to the $239,000. Is this board going to pick up the tab, or will the taxpayers of Princeton? Because that building, empty as it is, still pays $239,000 a year. So if you guys want to get into the real estate business, please explain to us the full picture. If you own a building like that, even if it's empty, you have huge operating costs. You can't turn off the air conditioning. You can't turn off the fans. You can't stop plowing the snow. Give us the pro forma. When you went to buy that building, you spoke with a real estate agent, and you spoke with the owners, and they had spreadsheets which showed the true operating costs of owning that building. Give those to us. Let us evaluate the wisdom of you getting into the real estate business.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Okay, Ms. Austin, then finally Jane Sheehan.
Oh.
Yeah.
Big pardon?
Oh.
Okay, I'm Alice Arts. I've been in Princeton ever since for all of my 75 years. Went to the Princeton school system, which worked perfectly well for me and got me into Barnard College, Columbia University, so I don't think it's all that horrible. And it was being improved while I was there and has been ever since, so it's not as though it's a 1940s school or something like that. Ray, demographics. I'll try to talk fast. basically, I think the property taxes are already driving people out of Princeton. And somebody here said that, there were houses that were for sale that nobody's buying. And they're not buying them because of the property taxes. And we actually have a relative who's trying to sell something in a place like Princeton with high property taxes, and they keep having to put their price down and down and down, and nobody seems to be interested in buying their house. So, this is a factor. Also, with all the shenanigans going on in Washington, who knows if we're going to even have an economy in another 6 months or something. I don't think this is the time to spend a whole lot of money for all sorts of projects. I think it should be possible to spend a great deal less. I mean, we as a family spend a lot less than we would like to. There's all sorts of stuff we'd like to have, like being able to go to a doctor, for instance, for some relatively serious condition, forget it, and we have health insurance, but still don't dare go to a doctor, and you're asking us to pay much more in the way of property taxes over and above what already is more than we can possibly afford. I mean, we're having to sell things that we own to try to survive at all in Princeton. This is ridiculous. So people are going to move out. And if you think you're going to get many more students in here in the next few years, you're probably not, because people are going to leave. And then where will you be? So anyway, I don't see the point of this. I don't think it's got to be possible to do it cheaper than this. This is ridiculous. This is very pie in the sky to me, I think. It cannot be that this is the only option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jane Sheehan. I sent you all an email with my husband, and I'm going to read it. Put the timer on. I'm going to be down in here in under a minute. Okay, dear members of the Board of Education, we have lived in Princeton for more than 35 years. Our children attended the Princeton Public Schools from kindergarten through high school and are now in their 30s. Don't say I look too old. Okay. So it should be no surprise to each of you that we have lived through other Princeton public school facility referendums over the year. We support the current $129 million referendum, and let us explain why. As with previous referendums, a great deal of research has been done, and all the needs that have been listed are justified. Postponing the referendum is not a good idea because the cost of expanding the high school and building a new school for 5th and 6th graders will only increase. In an attempt to keep our emails succinct, and my talking, we have one more comment. The Valley Road School needs to be brought down. While we respect its history, the cost of rebuilding it and making it usable in the 2020s would not be economically viable. Did I make it?
Yeah, thank you.
Time to spare. Well, thank you, everyone who spoke and everyone who came tonight. We appreciate your comments. I think, throughout this process, we have tried to be as open and transparent as we possibly can. And I think we all believe that, if not every speaker does. But we have tried, and we've done really the best that we can do to make sure that people know what we're thinking, and we've tried to listen to questions and concerns. As I said, decisions need to be made. We're never going to please everybody, but we're doing our best to do something that reflects both the values of our community and the wishes of our community. So again, we thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your thoughts with us. There is no decision at this meeting tonight. It was simply a time for us as a board to come together and chat and talk about these issues. So we appreciate you sharing that time with us. So
Hey,
thank
Pat,
you, and have a
the presentation that was given today, will that be on the webpage?
It will be on the website, yes.
I mean, so I would encourage people to go look at option one, question one. I guess we're not allowed to advocate. Are we allowed to advocate today, or
No.
we have to wait till we pass it? Okay.
Okay, so can I? Yes, the presentation, and all presentations from public meetings always go on the website, so you're always welcome to see those. So can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Greg, in a second. Betsy.